I talked to Jeff today, and I didn't even have the Myers-Briggs in my mind. This is a continuation of my prior video about where I concerned the Myers-Briggs test. So you'll have to watch it for the context. But yeah, I talked to him today, and I didn't even have the Myers-Briggs test in my mind for most of the time. But I got on this topic. It helped me to realize why I was having problems also with this type of personality that keeps coming up in different people, which shoots down my intuitions as being unimportant. And this is what I identify as the ENTP personality type I've noticed in a few of people I've talked to, because it's not logical. And I tried to describe to my friend just how I got deeply offended one night. I felt this night like I experienced some kind of beauty in the world that was just, I felt like I had a moment, I had this sacred moment with my friends. That was akin to the kind that Ray Bradbury's described, the kind that J.D. Salinger was so much in that he couldn't relate to people, the kind that I know Shakespeare knew about, I know that J.K. Rowling knew about, and the kind that I'd always felt. I always presumed that everyone had this experience. How could you be alive if you didn't? The sense of like the moment in a novel when you've reached the point where the theme becomes clear without the author really having to state it. It's a moment of clarity where everything that we communicate about on a day-to-day basis, almost all words in general, cannot match. It would almost make one want to become a hermit and never speak again if you could just stay there. Now, I'd presumed my whole life that other people knew what this was and they knew what I was talking about. Jeff said he'd only experienced that a few times in his life when he was on drugs. And most of the other time, he's too preoccupied with his fixations about the evil of the world and his own shortcomings, his own lack of ability to rise above the evil of the world. And here he is, sitting around, basically, sorry Jeff, telling me, I feel like I'm like I am the evil in the world. I eat so, I'm your typical American douchebag. I'm looking at him and it's like, that hadn't crossed my mind at all, and I've known him since the 4th grade. But I know that we all put ourselves down for things, but he puts himself down for things for other reasons than I do. And could it be that he and I are on different planets, that Shakespeare and J.K. Rowling and I and Salinger, we live on this different planet than the one that he does? And he's going to feel bad about himself and not know why for different reasons than I do, because he has a different set of values and a different set of things by virtue of which he takes in information. Now, I was reading up more on Jeff, his personality type, and the ISTJ, and I noticed there was a skeptic who was of the ISTJ personality type, who basically has an article in which he puts down the Myers-Briggs as being very unscientific. He says it's a good conversation starter, but it's too vague, it's too open to interpretation to be of value. I just have to think, maybe you just didn't run with it, because at first, yes, I thought, well, I could be an extrovert. It's flattering. I could be an artist, a sensory artist, but I realized that wasn't really who was ever important for me to be. The Myers-Briggs helped me to find meaning in my life, find my strengths, and to feel good about myself. Now, the argument by this particular skeptic, whose name I forget, I could look it up right now though, is that it makes people feel good about themselves when there's really not that much to feel good about themselves. It's a flattering mechanism. And I can't help but thinking, if Jeff could only flatter himself more, he'd have a much more realistic viewpoint of his life. That does seem to be something that an ISTJ does, though. To put people down. No, to put himself down. And my friend's whole crisis about other people is he doesn't feel like he fits in a group because he can't identify with people who are more confident than him. Really. He's envious of them. But the reason they're more confident is because it's not within their personal inclination to doubt themselves, to second-guess themselves. They're naturally more extroverted. They're naturally more sure of themselves. There are people who are just like that. And you can trace that back to a viewpoint. When Jung postulated the difference between extroversion and introversion, intuition and sensation, he wasn't just making this stuff up. Thinking and feeling are like two totally different worlds. You can see a trend in people who've been typed as feeling-based, as seeing things in a dramatically different way than the people who are thinking-based. And judging and perceptiveness makes a huge difference. The skeptic guy calls it unscientific, but for me, the evidence seems overwhelming. That I am an INFP, Jeff is an ISTJ. I mean, we all have the potentialities within us, obviously. But I think that we should recognize what is meaningful in our lives. It brings us closer to reality to do that than farther away from it. But it brings us into a territory that we wouldn't normally regard as reality. Someone else's viewpoint. Where someone else is coming from. And why that person's coming from there. It's helped me so much to reconcile with interpersonal relationships. Seeing how my mom's tendency towards sensation experience is different from the intuitive world. Seeing why in groups people think I think too much, but I observe things that they don't. It's worth looking into as more than a conversation starter. Because if something of such incredible importance is that kind of mystical experience that I feel, my friend, and maybe most of the world, has never felt. And all of these people, who I know have felt it through their writings, through their descriptions of it, happen to have come up in the same category. Also, I was once told by a friend in high school, which is the age of ignorance. I don't know. I mean, for me it was. I didn't know any of this stuff. I was told by a totally different friend that she can imagine seeing me as an extrovert. I'd always inclined towards introversion. I can't flatter myself as an extrovert. Because the more that I can fathom what it's like to live as an extrovert, the more frightening it is to me. Because I'm just naturally introverted. And sensory people, it's like the lack of meaning that I perceive in their lives had always stifled me. This was my problem with my girlfriend. She was an extroverted sensory person. She was very much a performer. And it's taken me so long to really come to terms again with my logical side. I would always, in essays, be criticized by teachers, except for the feeling-based teachers, for going off and not keeping the logical flow of something because I was trying to illustrate a point that was just not logical, and I was lived in this world. Even high school, I've been called by totally disparate people, like my high school English teacher and an old friend of mine, like, that I was like Hamlet. I've been compared to Holden Caulfield, just off the bat. It's incredible just how long I lived my life with this bias without knowing that I had this bias. Myers-Briggs helps me to recognize that this bias might be a gift. It helps me to find meaning in my life, and I think that we all need it. And whoever criticized it, maybe that's his way of finding meaning. But he should be cautious, because he's making maybe the mistakes typical of his personality type. Just like, I know, in my inability to take criticism sitting down, that's part of my thing. It's worth looking into.